She graduated in 2007 with a BA in Visual Communications and a minor in advertising. Her name is Amber Heinbockel. Her experience has centered on branding, designing, and developing user experiences for web design, along with developing advertising campaigns for Sperry, Safeway, and Nestle. Since Endicott, Amber has worked as a senior interactive designer at Members First, a senior art director at Rebel. Can't see without my glasses.
You're doing it.
A creative director at Cantina, senior product designer at Twitter, and she currently is a senior product designer at Google. Like I said, we're very fortunate to have her come back to campus and share her passion and expertise on branding and standing up. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me back. Can you hear me? All right. Hi. All right. It's good to see so many faces. So I'm here to talk to you today about building your personal brand and standing out. I first want to start with, let's talk about who I am. So I'm Amber Heinbockel. Thank you for the intro. I'm a senior UX designer who is passionate about, just passion in general. But I'm a creative and personal brand enthusiast who just happens to work at Google. So usually when I say this word to people, like at a dinner party or something like that, ears turn off and they want to know something. So I'm going to just jump right in. What's it like to work at Google? This has all happened to me in the last 12 months. So what's it like to work at Google? There are some really incredible perks. I've been featured on our YouTube channel for Go Meet Firebase, straight hair. We do all kinds of charity events, like a cycling event I just did last week. That is a slide. That's my 2-year-old and my husband riding down a slide in Mountain View. I've been to over 6 offices across the United States, 1 in Canada. And there's all kinds of things that you can get yourself involved in, very much like being a college student. So with that out of the way, when I talk about this, who's ever been given this advice before? Everybody, right? Follow your dreams. I'm not here to squash it. I'm not going to say don't follow your dreams. I'm just going to change the perspective. When I think of this phrase, I think of I want, I wish. I wish I had more money. I wish I had a house. I wish I had a boyfriend. I want all these things, right? But the truth about life is that you're not actually entitled to one of those things. Like, you are yourself, but you have to have the passion to go get those things. So when I talk about passion here, this can also be a loaded term. It's an interesting phrase. You'll hear this advice time and time again from inspirational speakers. And passions can be like, I love windsurfing, right? How do I make a career out of windsurfing? And I'm not saying you can't, but maybe that's not the ultimate thing that's going to lead you to success in your life, or money, whatever it is that you choose. You might actually think that in order to be a great windsurfer, you need to have a job in tech. So let's work backwards from that. So your passions, to me, are things that you're naturally gifted at. So for me, I'm naturally gifted as an artist. I love to draw. I love to talk to people. I love creating like pithy sayings that would go on a Super Bowl ad. Those are things that I love to do. So those are the things that I'm naturally gifted at, so I chose a career that would support those talents. So I encourage you all to do those things as well. So the interesting thing about the time that we live in now is that you can be a millionaire doing YouTube videos, makeup tutorials. You can do that. You can be an Instagram model. Like, people are making a ton of money doing those things. But like, what's the sustainability about that? And what does it look like in 5 to 6 years when maybe Instagram's not a thing? Right? When I went to school here, Facebook was a big thing. How many of you are on Facebook? Oh, you're all on Facebook. Okay, cool. I was like, nobody's on Facebook. I'm barely on Facebook. So we've all moved on. So how do I talk about myself when I talk about my personal brand and how I follow my passions? Like, how do I express that to the world? So if you were to Google me right now, and if anybody did before you got here, you might have landed on this. Oh, I'm not steering. Here we go. So I follow my passion, and right on the top of my website, this is my personal website, nothing to do with Google. I say it right there. I design mobile and user experiences that enrich the lives of users. That's because I'm a passionate artist, and I'm a passionate creative, and I love talking in short, pithy sentences, so that's how I decided to talk about myself. So this is how I present myself. and this is my personal brand, but I'm going to talk about how you can create yours. So how did I get here? So Brenda gave me a great intro here, but I wanted to talk about the different versions of myself that I've had since I've been a student here at Endicott. So I'll start at Endicott. Who here has done an internship or is doing one soon? Awesome, I did one too. My first one was in Germany. I went to an internship where I worked at an advertising agency that focused on, it was in Germany, and it focused on doing advertisements for a company that did like Scotch tape. So everything was about adhesives. So I went there and I had to learn how to take these like giant adhesive words in German, like I don't know how many characters, 25 characters for one word, and like fit it in to the margin so that people could like read and buy tape. So that was one internship, and that taught me, that first internship taught me what it was like in the day-to-day path of what it's like to go to work. So you get up in the morning, just like you are a student, you get your coffee, you hit the train, get on the train, you sit all day. That was an experience for me. I was like, oh, I'm sitting all day, I don't get to like get up between classes, talk to friends, that type of thing. That was kind of a surprise. My second internship was at a nonprofit in Oakland, California. It's sort of near San Francisco. I'm originally from California. And we can talk about that later if you want. And that internship taught me what it was like to work in a nonprofit. And what that meant was wearing all the hats. So I had to talk to different companies. I had to help be the salesperson. I had to help design the ads. I had to build the website. I had to, do all these things. That was great because it gave me a taste of little parts within the industry. And my last internship while I was here at Endicott was, and I thought I wanted to be an advertising executive, and magazines were the thing. I was like, 17 magazine and me, we're gonna do this. I'm gonna be like Helen Hunt or Devil Wears Prada, that's my plan. So I went and looked at a magazine and I discovered what it was like to interview bands and take photos and wind up writing articles and be an editor. And the truth is about working is you wind up wearing all of these hats as the different versions of yourself come across. So that's version 1.0. Version 1.5 was my first job out of school. I did magazine advertising and I kind of continued down that trajectory. And then I realized like one thing that I'm really passionate about, and I found myself doing on the weekends when I wasn't being paid to do it, was I was like looking at all these like best of websites. And I was finding that people were developing these websites that had a story behind them. So they'd have like these parallax designs and they'd really like engross you into the story. And it was this mix of design and copy mixed together in this experience that you could have on the web. And I was like, how do you do that, right? How do I do that? So I decided to learn how to code. I reverse engineered certain websites. I literally like went view, source, and like figured out how they built it. And I built my first website. That led to my version 2.0 there, working at Members First, where I was able to take the visual experience of what it's like to walk into a fancy health club or a country club and blend that with my coding experience that I taught myself. There, I was the salesperson. I'd like design something and then have to pitch that work off to those country clubs or pitch that work off to a really fancy health club like Equinox. So it made me be comfortable in front of people. There was nothing that was beyond my job. I had to do every single part of it. Which led me to 2.5, and I was like, how do I do that Super Bowl commercial? How do I make that happen, right? And Rival was focused on doing food advertising. So we did campaigns for things like Burger King, or for Safeway we would shoot things for all kinds of food, or maybe like a chef would come to our studio and they'd film a dish for Safeway, and it would be this really cool experience of like, how do you set up a shot for Safeway? How do you make food look really good on camera so that you want to buy it? Or like you're driving down the road, you see a billboard and there's like a burger on there and you pull off immediately to go get that burger. How do they make that happen? Well, I learned the food's not edible, so moving on. That led, and one thing I was really missing from Rival was I was like, oh man, I really miss the code aspect. Like that was pretty divorced from my job. I went more into the art direction and the creative direction of what it means to shoot a video and what it means to lead voice talent or acting talent through your vision of what you want them to do. But I was like, oh, I missed that code part, right? And mobile apps were just coming up, and there was phones, right? I'm not that old, but there was just like apps were just sort of becoming a thing, and every company said that they wanted one. So I'm like, how do I build an app? So I found this tiny little shop, and originally they were in Newton Corner. There were like 10 people, and they were like, we've grown so big that we want to expand our offering. We only offer development technical chops right now, and we need somebody to put like the visual design face to that. So they hired me, and I was the only designer there amongst 10 developers, and it was my job to help them pitch the app experiences that we wanted to build for our clients. So I built that team from myself to 7 designers within a year and a half, and that meant that we built the company to over 50 people and moved into the seaport in Boston. There, I had a coworker say, Amber, like, you're crushing it, things are going well. You got a lot of ideas about what's going to happen in the future. Why don't you talk at South by Southwest? Has anybody heard of this? South by? Yeah? Well, South by Southwest is this conference that happens every year, and there's actually, I think, 3 of them. One is a movie, like it's about, you see awards like Sundance, there's a South by for that. There's a technology one, which is the one I spoke at, and then there's one more that's all about, what is the last one? Bands, music. So I spoke at the technology conference about gestures and interaction design. And that was my idea of like, what are mobile devices gonna be like when we're not looking at screens anymore? So think Minority Report, people sort of waving their hands in the air, but I was also talking about things like 3D touch, which you all do every single day if you have a phone. So you push hard, something happens. I predicted that. So, well, I wasn't like the sole person who like made that happen, right? That would be pretty cool, but I predicted that in that talk, which caught the eye of a little company called Twitter. And Twitter came to me and they said, we love your ideas, how can we work with you? And they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I joined Twitter, and that was over 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. And I wound up working on a team that does development for developers. So we basically create an experience that gives you analytics about how your app is performing. So it still gave me that development side, but much more on the engineering side. And working at Twitter is like a pretty cool experience. It was my first time in a huge company, going to San Francisco every couple of weeks. It's got just like a really cool space. I hung out with Jack. They had actors come in all the time, so I got to meet like Seth Rogen. It was like a really cool experience. And then one day they called us in, and they were like, company meeting, and I was like, okay, and I was having this cauliflower for lunch. I was like, it was my jam. I don't know, I'm not that into cauliflower, but that day I was. And all of a sudden they're like, the founders of our small little group come out and they tell us the story, and they're like, guess what? Today's a big day. Boom, the G logo drops. Now you work for Google. So we were part of an acquisition. So we can talk more about that later if you've got questions. So the point to all of that story is when you follow your passion, and I kept digging into my passion in each part of that story. It's like, how can I bring art to life? How can I bring stories to life? How can I 1.0, 1.5, 2.0, all of those things to build my authentic self, which is my personal brand. So how do you build your personal brand? Look at that. Your personal brand is what others think about you when you're not in the room. So just let that set in for a second. It's what other people would say about you when you're not there. That means you have some control over it, but ultimately other people decide. So how do you build your personal brand and have control over it? You're going to ask yourself 3 questions. It's more like a 3-staged approach here. What are you passionate about? So I told you all I'm passionate about developers, I'm passionate about being a brand advocate, personal brand advocate. What are you personally passionate about? So when I talk to students, oftentimes they come up to me and they're like, Amber, I'm so-and-so and I'm a this major, right? But you're so much more than that major. You're so much more than just a student here at Endicott. What are the things that you do when you do on your free time? What are the things that you talk about with your friends? Those are all the things that you can start to bring into your personal brand. What are your strongest attributes? This is maybe the most important one to me. What sets you apart, and how would you describe yourself to someone else? Everybody here, you're on a plan to get a degree, right? Every single person in this room. Now think about Boston area. How many students are in your exact shoes right now graduating with your exact same degree from a different school? Maybe they're graduating from MIT, right? Those students can actually be at a lower level than you are if you can decide what your attributes are that you can bring to a company. Mine in your shoes, when I was sitting right where you were at your age, would have been, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done, right? Tell employers that. Tell your friends that. Show that to the people that you love, that you hang out with, that you're friends with, because those things all come into the things that they'll say about you when you're not in the room. And the last thing is, how do others perceive you? Now this is when you get real comfortable with some friends and family. Maybe don't ask your mom. My mom's like my biggest fan, so she'll like give me all these props. But somebody that you feel really safe around, or maybe somebody that you're like kind of adversaries with, and ask what they say about you when you're not in the room, right? It's gonna be kind of a humbling experience. And ask if what they say about you matches with what you want people to talk about. What would they say to an employer recommending you for a job? How would they describe you? What about for a blind date? How would that person describe you? Are you reliable? Do you show up on time? Are you willing to do whatever it takes? Do you talk behind people's backs? Do you burn bridges with companies, with teams? Those things all come back around. So things to consider. So your personal brand is ultimately powerful, impactful, it sells you, and it differentiates you from others and sets you apart. So this talk could be the one thing that you leave with that the kids at MIT don't have. And that could actually be your personal brand that you go on job interviews and talk to people about. You're all real people, you're not just numbers on a piece of paper, right? So like this is your chance to talk about that. So I want you to ask yourself, what is your personal brand, and is it the most personal and impactful version of yourself? Cool. So a note about social media. I can't work at Google or Twitter and not talk about this in a personal brand discussion. So I won't give you like the scare tactics of, don't post nude photos of yourself on Instagram. I'm sure you're all smart enough not to do that. But be sure that your social media brands match your personal brand. Are you saying on every single page that is public what you want people to know about you? You notice on the first couple of slides I said that I'm passionate and I'm creative and I'm enthusiastic. I say that right away, right on my website. It's the first thing that you'll see. I'm passionate about developers, I'm passionate about design. Those are the things that you want to make sure matches across the board. Your Twitter account should reflect that. Every single post that I put on Twitter should reflect those types of messages. Now, we're all young, we've got many, many years in this age of social media, so don't feel like you've got to nail it right now, right? But think about yourself in 5 years. Before you hit send on anything that you post, think with your future version 4.0, be proud of what you're posting now. And if not, maybe you should have a private account that you just share with friends and family and check your privacy settings, or maybe you should not hit enter. So just things to consider. These are like my top 5 social media tips here. Number 1 is grab your brand. You can all do that today. So go out. I picked Amber Monroe, which is my first and middle name, because I'm married now. My last name has changed, so I decided to go with a name that would last me for a really long time. But maybe that's not part of your life plan. Go out and grab it. So grab it in your Twitter accounts, your Facebook account, LinkedIn. Grab your name, and it could be a personal brand, but my first website probably had like Water Polo Girl 94. Like maybe don't do that. Maybe you do. That's up to you. It's your personal brand. Privacy settings, right? Privacy settings are changing often. It's not just the security of your account. I'm saying update your passwords. That's actually really important because that can damage your personal brand. But setting your privacy settings, checking them, really important. Do public versus private accounts. I touched on this a little bit. If you have an Instagram account, you can have 2 accounts, right? You can have the one that's public to people, that is all about your personal brand, that people will be able to search for years and years to come. And then you can have your fun brand that's like private, you only invite certain friends, you post whatever pictures you want there. Search yourself in incognito. Does everybody know what that is? Okay, it's a little tab. There's one in Chrome. It's on every website. It's basically a blind search. You're all internet savvy, I'm sure. Search yourself in incognito. See what other people with your same name are saying, because that can damage your personal brand if you don't actually distinguish yourself. So if you've got a really common name, make sure you check. On your Google search results, check the 4th, 5th pages of those results. Don't just check the first page or the photos. Those are important to see too, but check 4, 5. You never know what kind of people that are either trying to take your name or part of your name might go with. And then remember, the internet never forgets. That includes things like Snapchat, where you think the photos are going away, they're not. They're stored in a database somewhere, so please be careful. So with that said, Thank you. I really appreciate you spending the time with me this afternoon on this beautiful warm day. Thanks.
Now this part of this presentation, we're actually going to have a special opportunity to have Amber be interviewed by Zach Weiss. He's collected some questions directly from the audience and from some of the student peers, so we're inviting.
Yeah, bring it on. If you have more questions, I'm sure we'll have time today.
Amber, first question for you. Obviously, you went to Endicott, graduated 2007. A lot of the dorms that are probably here now weren't here. But what was your favorite dorm that you lived in your days at Endicott?
I don't know if I can even remember the names. Reynolds is still here?
It is?
Yeah, that was my freshman dorm. Stayed with I'm an only child, no siblings. First year, I had 3 roommates in one room. Yeah, it was interesting. Let's just say I never roomed with girls again. And then I had one over by the water in Dr. Wiley's office. One of the little houses there, one of the white ones. I don't remember what that's called. Bridgebond, maybe something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
It was the closest I've ever lived to the beach, and I had my window open. I could see. Oh, it was wonderful. If you're staying there and you get to look at ocean views out of your dorm room, really cherish that.
Kind of taking a bit of a different spin. Obviously, you talked about going from Twitter to Google.
Yeah.
What was the interview process like for both those jobs? Obviously, going from where you were to a huge corporation has to be very different.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, I'd say I can use because I came in from an acquisition from Twitter into Google, I'd say the hiring process for Twitter, which is the best example I can give, is as a designer, they want to see your portfolio. And one sort of interesting takeaway that comes to your personal brand, even if you're not a designer, is they want to see how you talk about stories from end to end. Because ultimately, that's how you talk to your coworkers, that's how you sell your ideas within the company, that's how you level up. So the first thing that I did was present a case study of something that I had done in the past. And for a designer, that's pretty easy. I showed a mobile app. And I talked about my process end to end and what portions I specifically worked on. So if it was the UI, the flow, if it was the actual visual design, all of that, I told the story. And then I went into examples proving that story time and time again. So they knew I was consistent about it. So I'd go in and be I also did that on this app, and I followed the same process, and here's an interesting tidbit that happened here. So you could do that in an entrepreneur meeting, you could do that in a meeting for a nonprofit. Just talk about yourself in terms of how you interact with coworkers, teammates, friends, and then talk about how you improve your process time and time and time again.
And just going back to the beginning, as you're back in Endicott now, 11 years after you graduated, how did what you learned when you were here really help you get there? Obviously, the internship experience being the launching point.
Yeah, we just had a good conversation about this over dinner. The small class sizes were really great because you make connections and relationships with each other. That being said, you don't necessarily stay with those friends forever. You go through different seasons in your life, right, where you have friends and then you move on from each other. But you wind up actually getting one-on-one conversations with your professors. You're not just another number in class. And a quick non sequitur, I said I'm from California. The reason why I came to Endicott was my high school, I was I'm going to Boston, this is happening. There's a story that leads up to that, but I'll start with that. And I applied to Tufts, Northeastern, and BU, BC, and they were all yep, you're in, that's great. I played water polo, so they were yeah, come on over, you can do crew. And I was okay, and my high school college counselor was just apply to one small school, one. Right? So I looked up small schools in New England, and then I started looking at the North Shore, and then I started looking at reviews about Endicott and its class size, and she started egging me on. She was if you're gonna go that far from home as an only child of a single parent, you better have some support, right? And so I came here, I was accepted to Endicott probably same week as this week, and there was a blizzard, and I never got to see all the beautiful photos that were of campus that sold me on the school originally. But I sat down and I went to Hale, the castle on the hill, whatever that's called, I forgot. And Dr. Wiley sat down with me and was this is why you should come to Endicott. And he sold me, and that's why I went, and that's why I'm here today.
Now, so, going back to Google, obviously, how long have you been there?
Almost 2 years.
So how would you describe the culture? Is anything like move the internship?
Okay.
In any way, shape, or form?
Yes, there are, the hats with the the nerd hats, I don't know how to describe them. Those are real. Those are called Noogler hats. I'm not being ironic, they definitely call you Nooglers. You look like Nooglers too because you're like trying to figure out what to badge in everywhere. They have slides on campus. Nap pods are real. We talked about it a little bit. There's like a 20-minute nap cycle. Every office is themed differently. So like Mountain View, which is headquarters, has sort of a wider theme because it's an older office. But Cambridge has a theme around the T, which is really cool. Like there's a red line, you can get off at Harvard stops, and they have everything's themed around the T. What other things happen in the internship? The things that aren't like the internship, the office building that they're in Mountain View, the way that they made the sales team like go run to that pizza shop, like that doesn't happen. But like they do have G-bikes that you can jump on. That's a bizarre experience because here in Boston you have Hubway bikes, so you have to like pay and then take the bike. But in Mountain View you just literally climb onto any bike and ride anywhere you want, and then half the people just throw them on the lawn and then go to a meeting, come back out and grab a different bike. So it's for Google tidbit.
Obviously being at Google, a lot different than when you first started off to do 10 years. What's been your favorite thing about being at Google? Obviously a much larger company where your role's more defined. You kind of having to wear 5 or 6 hats when you were first starting off.
It's a company that has so many opportunities within it. Like once you're in, if you want to work on YouTube as a designer, if you want to work on nonprofit or medical or anything scientific, or you want to be on like the fringe of learning, like a product that launched Google Glass. Like if you wanted to be on the next Google Glass, you have opportunities to like move horizontally within the company and really anywhere in the world. So it's the first company that I've ever looked at in my career and been like, I can be here for 8 to 10 years.
And then obviously also you taught yourself code while holding down a full-time job. Kind of how'd that go, and when did you first say, okay, this is what I really want to get into?
Well, my full-time job needed elements of a developer there. So I just said that things like, hey, I might not be the best developer, but I'm willing to try. And so they were like, cool. And then I got paid to learn. So always be willing to put your hand up for the things that you're maybe a little uncomfortable with, or be really humble about what your readiness of that thing is. Like I wasn't a great developer to start, but I was honest about it, and then they supported that. So.
And then once you started kind of getting behind your coding, how important was it with your networking ability to kind of get to where you are now, obviously in a much larger company based in a major city?
Yeah, I'd say you can network multiple ways. I talked about that in your personal brand. How other people talk about you is important. I'd say the other way is how you present yourself publicly, so doing public talks like this. I've talked at many Google events, but those things tend to get the eye of big companies. But maybe public speaking is not for you, right? Like maybe that's stage fright, it's not your thing, it's my thing. So maybe you find a different way in. So look at the people that are where you want to be in the next 10 years, maybe your ultimate career, and see what their career trajectory was. Maybe they started at a tiny startup. That's often ways I would reverse engineer how to build my career, just like I reverse engineer coding.
And if you could go back and change anything on your way to where you are today, is there anything to change? Do you think everything kind of happened for a reason to get you where you are in 2018?
That's a good question. I would advocate for myself more. That means a lot of things. That means negotiating your opening salaries, and this is an interesting one. I always negotiated, but I just kind of did it blindly. I didn't really know what I was asking for. Gosh, this is going to be like the thing. You guys are all going to be millionaires. Your starting salary dictates what your next job salary will be. Let that set in. So if you don't negotiate your first salary, your next salary is only a 5%, 10%, if you're lucky, bump from there. So it's important to negotiate. A lot of people are afraid to ask for what they want. They're afraid to stand up for themselves. They're afraid to admit when you're wrong or you've done something wrong. But the best people to work with are the people that advocate for themselves and then also can say, oops, I made a mistake, I let it, I will accept the consequences, and your team will understand that. But the number one tip is negotiate your salaries. Where you start is where you'll be in the next 5 years, and that's a really important stuff to know. You're welcome. That's a good tip. Oh, okay, that too. Okay, cool. Does anybody else have any questions?
So it seems like you have a lot of different interests, and something that I've struggled with is while I try to learn something else, I feel like I lose the ability to put attention to something else. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I'd say I'm lucky in the fact that I have interests that all kind of go in the same direction, right? They're all creative or developer based, so I kind of picked my niche there. I'm not sure what your specific interests
Yeah,
are.
I'm very similar. So I'm a computer science minor, entrepreneurship major, and design is kind of like the side passion.
Nice.
So I'm trying to balance all of that. And I feel like when I try to work on programming, I stop paying attention to design as much. And just
The
trying
good
to
news is
balance
you
it.
don't have to choose.
Okay.
Do it all and find the goal that you're trying to do. So maybe you're trying to build an app which hits every single part of those skills that you just listed off. Entrepreneurship, design skills, coding skills, and then you have a tactile thing that you'll leave and you'll go to a company with like Google with and be like, look what I built. Here's how I built it, and then they look at you like a unicorn, which is like an industry term meaning you can do all parts, and then they actually see like your process. So when I did that Twitter interview, that's a really good example of being like, I'm passionate about all these things, here's how I applied it to an app, and here's the story of how I built it, and then they're like, oh, okay, I get your process. So that would be my suggestion, especially if you're kind of in that other focus. If you're not, and say your interests are like fly fishing and banking, right? Right? Like, let's go really wide. How can you apply the things that you love about fly fishing? Maybe it's concentrated stillness. I'm just making stuff up now. But maybe you can like apply that to finance. So maybe you don't jump at the first opportunity, and that's how you weave that story together. Fly fishing has taught me that I can have a moment with myself that's quiet and retrospective. I apply that to finance by X, right? Which makes me have sound decisions when I invest your money in the stock market. Those are the types of conversations that you have. You weave your passions together. Yeah.
Did you ever consider grad school?
I did, and then I quickly, okay, Endicott professors are all gonna be like, get her out of here. School's expensive. Who here has student loans? Yeah, okay. That's what made me not go to grad school, and I was actually making more money out of grad school, following my passion by like applying myself and getting traction that way, that I applied that. Now I'm not saying don't go to grad school. In certain careers it's going to be applicable, but maybe you take this time that you have the opportunity at Endicott to do internships to learn about what it takes to be at the next level. You'll often find a lot of people don't have graduate degrees, don't have PhDs. The ones that do were like super passionate about one particular area and knew what they wanted to do right out of school. But if you're going into tech like I did, those don't necessarily translate. And so it's not actually giving you an upper hand to work at a company like Google necessarily to have like a PhD or a master's in something. It can help, but it's just one more check on your box of your resume. When as a hiring manager, I'd much rather see like what you're passionate about, how you talk about yourself, how you work within a team, how you can apply fly fishing to finance. Like those are things that I'd want to hear you talk about because that means you're great to work with, and that you're willing to learn, and that we can work with you and you can build up. So long story short, no, and hopefully my long-winded answer answers why I didn't. But on the note of student loans, really focus on learning what all of the financial jargon is around that. Like learn what compound interest is, learn what your interest rate is and how much you're paying for it, learn when you're gonna have to pay. All of those things are really helpful to give you the financial freedom and opportunities to pursue what you want in your career. So if you don't know and you're not passionate about it now, get on YouTube, watch some YouTube videos while you're like brushing your teeth and figure it out. If the faster you learn about it, the better off you're gonna be for the next 10 years.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
When you were like graduating Endicott, were there any companies that you like specifically had your eye on, and were you like I don't know, what was your experience just like upon graduation?
Yeah, I mentioned the Where's Prada. I wanted to work at like 17 magazine. It's like always a dream. I had my heart set on working at advertising agencies. So I was like, I'm going to New York, that's what's happening. But I realized quickly, like, if I wanted to stay in Boston and be realistic about my finances at the time, coming out of school, I had to sort of get the job that I could get here. That was a pathway to get to those other places. So I mentioned I worked in like print design originally. Those was all part of my plan to go work in a big magazine. And the internship program gave me some of that real world experience of what it would be like to be in those places. So funny story, South by Southwest. The other company that came knocking was Vogue. And so they were like, how can you apply all of the cool technology things that you've learned that you talked about and like bring it into a company like Vogue? And I never thought that I could actually like have the opportunity when I graduated to be able to talk to a company that I had my heart set on, but it was not in the way that I originally expected. I originally expected to be like an ad agency person, and then I went there as a technologist selling them like apps and stuff. So it's like, it's amazing when you have your heart set on things in the companies that you work at, how oftentimes you'll meet them or wind up there without expecting it. So.
Have you ever experienced a failure through your career, and like how did you like overcome it?
Oh yes, yes. Making mistakes is number one, and being honest about them and like shoring up to it right away. Like trying to think of like an actual example. Oh, I had a meeting with a client once at Cantina, and I didn't read the full brief. I had like 3 clients managing, and I was just made the excuse for myself that I was too busy. And I thought I could just sort of like stumble my way through the meeting, and it showed. It was like all over me, and I didn't bring my best self to work that day. And I had to, you know, my principals of the company were there. They trusted me with that client, and I didn't show up that day. And that was my way of being like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to come prepared every single time, and I'm going to ask questions rather than talk about what I think I know about the company. Like maybe let the client tell me what they want rather than me implying that. So that's just one like concrete example of where I made mistakes, but definitely have made many. Really good question.
Questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, as a career counselor, I have students in my ops lab, and they want a passion, but they're just like not quite sure what they're passionate about. And you sound like you're very, directed.
Yeah.
Like, what would your advice be for them if they're like not quite sure what they're passionate about?
Where do you get your best grades? That's like instantly where you're naturally gifted at things, right? So like, where do you get A's? What's easy for you? Is math really easy for you? That's like a great indicator of things that you can apply yourself with and easily succeed with. And we're all like naturally gifted with certain things. Like you might be, certain things just come to you easily. I'm sure you've all experienced that in school. And so those are the things that I would focus students on. And it's hard to say, I would almost not say like, just go to be a designer at Google, because a designer at Google might not exist in 5 to 10 years. It's the skills that I have as a designer at Google that I can apply to the future and the next 5, 10 years of jobs that I'll be doing. It's important for me personally that I like keep up with technology, but for all of you, if you don't know what you're passionate about yet, then maybe it's the skills that come easy to you, and then being able to use those as tools in your toolbox to apply to whatever job it might be. We'll learn how to like weave in that fly fishing story. That was really good. You can do that.
So I work with students across a wide range of sectors. They're communication students, and they can really work in different industries.
Yeah.
And have to figure that out and get to try things and different stuff. I think a lot of students, many don't get to try necessarily or think about the tech sector, and there's so much opportunity there, and it's a very unique kind of environment. Can you talk a little bit about your own personal experience? You talked about the culture, but just kind of how does it compare to some of those other types of places in terms of maybe learning opportunities, as well as maybe thinking about compensation across different industries. Anything else?
There's a lot of questions in there. The first
Right,
one is
just
like
a
technology.
little bit about the tech sector
Tech
compared
sector.
to some other industries.
Okay. I've worked in advertising, so the creative side, and I've worked in, and amongst the creative side, I've worked with companies like Putnam and Bank of America, but also like grocery stores. So I got a little bit of a sight into there. But working in tech is different. Some of the differences, I would say, in tech, it's much more casual in terms of like your physical dress, how you present yourself. But those things are still important, right? Like it's still important to like take a shower and like be presentable and all of those things. It's a little less important in tech only because they care more about what's in your head than how you dress. Versus in banks, like you might actually, you wouldn't want to like pass over your retirement savings to somebody who doesn't present themselves well. So in the banking industry, it's much more important to be a little bit more conservative and buttoned up. So that's like just like the day-to-day conservative tone versus casual tone. The one thing that I really have appreciated about tech is how they want you to experiment with anything. It's set up for you to be creative. So they have things like maker spaces with 3D printers and like all of the things that you could ever need to like create a prototype and make something. Like they really want you to do that. That's part of your job. Like if you have a passion at Google, and you can like make a case for it, that could be your full-time job, right? And they will give you a team and like they will support that. That's how they've been so successful. At a company like Twitter, you have to sort of apply yourself towards like social media and like presidential campaigns, things like that, and like put maybe some of your own personal biases away for the better good of the platform. So every company is a little bit different. I wouldn't even say that it's industry focused. It's more about like the ethos of the brand of the company that you're coming in and how much that matches with your personal brand and what you want it to be. It's perfectly acceptable to go into a company and say, this is my ladder job. There are plenty of people that like, you know, your first job out of school, you're gonna not be like, this isn't my dream job, but you're gonna learn lots of things that are gonna help you accomplish that. Try to go in thinking about what you want to take out of the job so that you can apply it to the next ladder. There's one more.
Yeah. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. I could either see myself starting my own company, or, I mean, I love working at Google, so right now I can't see myself out of that. I just would love to stay there. And right now I have a 2-year-old, so my focus is like being a good mom. So it's a little less career driven and more about like growing my money, learning about money, investing in money, and maybe investing in myself in a future company. So we'll see.